Hey guys, welcome back to Keys to the Cosmos, where we focus on astrophotography made simple. And today I want to talk about something that I'm probably noticed quite passionate about, and that is light pollution filters. And that's probably because I live in Toronto, Canada, where we have bortle line skies, pretty tough conditions to do astrophotography in. So light pollution filters have become a really essential part of my setup, and I want to just give a video to explain a little bit about them. This will just be more of an overview of the different kinds and what I suggest, from my opinion, people should have, particularly when you're starting out. And just sort of how they work, how to install them as well in your camera and in your telescope. There's much more detailed videos out there with scientific explanations of how they work and head-to-head. Those are great videos, and I recommend watching them if it's something you're really interested in as well. But for now, this is just more for beginners to give an overview and why they're so important if you live anywhere near a city or in a city like I do. So obviously, in ideal conditions, we all, as astrophotographers, live in your dark sky sites, and bortle one, bortle two, and light pollution isn't something we'd have to deal with. But the reality is that most of us do live in a city or near one, and it's a real challenge. I always think of light pollution as sort of like, take for example, any target that you're looking at, you're looking at image, and it's clear, it's crisp, you can see all the details, but now put a really thin piece of tissue paper over that target. Well, now those details get a little bit more washed out. You can still see the target, you can recognize what it is, but it's not as clear as it was before. Now imagine putting another piece of tissue paper in front of it, and another one, and another one. That's sort of like the Bordeaux scale. As it gets higher, that's like another piece of tissue paper in front of it. And so by the time you get to 7, 8, 9, it becomes pretty washed out, and it's really hard to get a clear image of that target. And that's sort of the way it works with light pollution. It impedes us being able to image all those details, the beautiful intricacies of the gas and things like that. So we need something to be able to cut through that tissue paper, as it were, that light pollution, and get back right through to that target, be able to get a nice crisp image of it. And so that's where light pollution filters come in, and they've really advanced, fortunately, over the years, especially even just in the last couple, that have allowed us to shoot at times we never would have been able to, like on a full moon or in the middle of a city, even. Whereas before that just wasn't possible. So fortunately, light pollution is getting worse, but fortunately, technology is advancing, and we're seeing the results of that. So it's pretty amazing. So that's what I want to share with you guys today. Now, uh, under those perfect conditions we talked about, in a dark sky, maybe in the middle of the desert somewhere, you don't need a light pollution filter. In fact, you don't even want one. You want to be able to shoot the night sky as natural as it is. You want those natural star colors to come through, the blue, the red, the orange, yellow, and just get to be able to image the sky the way it is, without having to worry about, sky glow or any other sort of light pollution. But the reality is, as we mentioned, that's just not possible for most of us. So we need something to sort of suppress or remove that unwanted light and just image what we do want, those uh, emission nebula, whatever it is, to pass through onto our sensor. And I think there's a bit of a misconception with the way light pollution filters work. I think some people seem to believe that they bring in more light, and that's why you're able to get brighter images. They're bringing more light, and that's why you get that contrast. But in fact, it's actually the opposite. Light pollution filters are actually blocking out light. They're not bringing in any more light than there is. They're blocking out what you don't want. And so it appears that that light that you do want is brighter. And that's why you're able to get a nicer image, more contrast, and therefore more detail and a much prettier image. So hopefully that makes sense. But knowing that is important too, because there are different kinds of light pollution filters. I always say there isn't really one that works best for all things. There are some that you can use for all applications, assuming there is light pollution to deal with, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work best for everything. So I'll try to explain that with examples here. So these are just filters that I use personally. There are many kinds, and this is obviously a very simple overview. There are so many kinds of filters. If you ever look it up, it's crazy. It'll make your head spin. So I'm trying to make a video to help you eliminate having to look through them all. And if that's something you don't want to have to do, and just something I know that's worked for me. Not being paid to mention these names. It's just products that I've used, and they've really made such a difference in the quality of my images. So talking about a filter that you can use for just about everything. Here's an example. Here's a Skytech CLS CCD. Now it says right on the box, this is a city light suppression filter. There's no blocking going on. It's just simply suppressing. So this is the kind of filter that you can use even in harsh conditions, but you wouldn't use this on like a full moon night. It just wouldn't work well enough. It's not suppressing enough of that light. It's not that you can't, but you're going to get a lot of that moonlight come in your image, and then you're really going to have to struggle to remove it in post-processing. So that's not something I would generally use anywhere near a full moon. But it can be used on all objects, and we'll talk about this in detail a little more, whether it's a reflection nebula or an emission nebula, a galaxy. This is something that will work for everything. It's not going to block out light that you do want, because it's not that harsh to filter. On the other end is this one here. This is the Optolong L Extreme. Now this is a very aggressive and harsh filter. This is what's considered a narrowband. So what that means is it's only allowing very narrow forms of light, wavelengths of light in, the ones you want, and blocking everything else out. So this you can use with a full moon. I don't know if maybe you didn't get a chance, but if you haven't already, check it out. My video there where I'm imaging Thor's helmet. It's quite a brief video, but you talk about the worst conditions possible. We're talking lit up street, full moon, faint target, low in the sky, very small. And yet with this filter, I was able to get a pretty decent image. Here it is here. Not amazing, but when you consider everything and shooting with a small refractor, I mean, it was a tiny little smudge on my camera. And to be able to get a pretty good image out of it, a lot of that has to do with a filter like this. But it's not ideal for everything. Again, if you're imaging an emission nebula, which means a nebula where it's ionized gas, that light is coming from within the target, they tend to be very bright. You can give an example, Orion, Horsehead, I mean, there's so many. Heart Nebula, North America, California, all those nebula, those are all emission nebula. They're very bright in general, and that is ionized gas where the light's coming from within, from those stars. And so we're able to use something that's a lot more harsh because there's a lot of light coming through, and a filter like that will allow those wavelengths of light like HA03 to come in and block out everything else. And so that's why they work really well. And with this filter, you can shoot on a full moon. I've done it many times. In fact, most of my images were shot at least one night on a full moon using this, and you still get a really nice image. It's amazing. On the other hand, with the Skytech CLS, this works for emission nebula, but it doesn't do as good a job because it's not able to block out everything around it, and so you don't get that stark contrast. But what this is good for is reflection nebula. So that's a different kind. So think of Pleiades, which is actually just a star cluster, Witch's Head, Iris Nebula. Those are all different types of reflection nebula. And the difference is with those cases, so take the Pleiades, it's actually just a star cluster. But what's happening is the light from those stars is reflecting on gas around it, and that's why you see those images of all that beautiful blue gas. That's just gas that's reflecting the light from those stars. The Witch's Head Nebula, another example. That's just actually a very faint gas that's reflecting starlight. In that case, Rigel, which is the bottom right star in the constellation of Orion. So that the light from that star is reflecting onto the gas, and we're imaging that gas, which just happens to look like a witch's head with its hat and nose and everything. So that's the difference. And in the case of, a narrowband filter trying to shoot reflection nebula, it's actually going to block out some of that light that we want. And that's not good. That's going to affect your images. So that's why it actually won't work well. Whereas a suppression filter like this that allows in more broadband instead of narrowband is going to work a lot better. There's another version that's actually very good. A lot of guys use this. This is the Optolong L Pro. This is good as well for reflection nebula. But for me personally, I just found I had troubles with it. I don't know if it's because I have a Astro modified camera, but my exposure looked pink, and I played with the ISO. I just couldn't get it to work. I'm saving it for later when I switch to a Astro dedicated camera, which we'll talk about down the road. But on my Astro modified DSLR, it just didn't work for me. Maybe you guys have some suggestions what that could be, and feel free to mention in the comments. But for me, it didn't work, but I know a lot of guys use it, and it's great. So the L Pro is good too. But for narrowband, the L Extreme, and there's another one called it L Enhance, it's not quite as aggressive. So that's good if maybe you're not in as bad of a light pollution like I am. Maybe you're 5 or 6, or it is a darker sky for whatever reason, no moon. It's not as aggressive, so you still get a little bit more light and blocking out what you don't want. So those are just a couple versions that I like to use. Now there are different types of actual filters for different applications within each different types. So the L Extreme, for example, it comes in about, I think, 5 or 6 different types of actual filters in different shapes and forms, depending on the application. So here's an example. This is the Optolong L Enhance, but the L Extreme comes the same way. So you can see this is a clip-in filter. So what this does is, I'll try to show you right here on my actual DSLR. And here this is the CLS CCD, but it's another example of a clip-in filter. You see it clips right in front of the sensor. And the good thing about this is it still allows you to put a camera lens on. It doesn't block the threading, so you're able to install a lens and then shoot without a telescope, whether you want to do like Milky Way images or really wide field. And so it can be used for both. You can put a telescope on or a camera lens. So that's really nice. They're a little bit more expensive than the other type, which I want to mention now, which is these. These are the 2-inch versions of filters. Now, obviously, that's not going to fit in my DSLR. But for these, there's a couple ways you can install them. Now, in case of my Sharp Star here, which I've mentioned many times, in it I have the focal reducer, which is installed right here in the telescope. And not to get into detail, but basically that just flattens out your image. It makes nice sharp stars right to the edge. That's why I use a focal reducer. But they even advertise on it that the focal reducer pieces actually has within them a threaded area where you can install a 2-inch filter like this. So tough to see here, but there actually is threading here just inside. And then what you do is you take the 2-inch filter, you thread it right inside, and then this just goes right back on the telescope. And that's it. Your filter is installed. You're good to go. If by chance your telescope isn't designed this way, or you don't have a focal reducer with that option, you need something like this. This is called a filter tray. So essentially what it does is, on one end, this would install onto your telescope. On the other end, it's a little bit more narrow. This would be where the camera would go. And in between, as per the name, is your filter tray. So right in there, the threading, that's where you put the 2-inch filter. It fits securely. And then you just simply put that back, install it onto your telescope and your camera on the other end, and now you're good to go. So if you don't have it built in, this is something you're going to need. And that's why I mentioned in my other video there, things to do before you go out, preparation, sorting all that out, making sure you have what you need. Maybe when you bought this filter, now you can't install it, and you're going to be pretty frustrated. So make sure you're able to do a dry run and get it all together, and it works good. So those are the different types. Couple things to keep in mind. When you are using a real narrowband filter like the L Extreme, you're going to see the effect it has on your live view. So when you're using a DSLR and you're trying to find your target, or even just for focus, and you're looking on your screen there at the live view, you're going to see how dim it looks, because it really is blocking out light. In fact, a lot of the stars you normally would have seen in live view are no longer visible. So that's just something to keep in mind. It is a bit of a trade-off, but you can still see the bright stars, obviously, like Rigel and Sirius and Deneb and all those. You'll still see them. All the major constellations, you'll still be able to see live view. So it's not that big a deal, but just something to keep in mind. When I first put it in, I was pretty shocked what a difference it was, and it was a lot more challenging to find targets at first. Another thing I want to mention too is you're going to see quite a difference in the quality of your images. A quick story: when the first time, this was probably a couple months in when I started the hobby, and I remember I was trying to image the Heart Nebula, and it's not a crazy faint emission nebula. It's not really bright, but it's normally not too much of a challenge. But I was using the Skytech CLS. That's all I had at the time. It wasn't the best conditions. There was a bit of a moon, and boy did I struggle. Here's the picture here. It's not terrible, but you can see it's very faint. Man, I worked hard in post-processing just to even get that out. It was really tough. Well, in the meantime, between then and the week after, when I had another clear night, I had got the L Extreme. And I was going to image the Soul Nebula right underneath it. And so I tried the L Extremes, and they're basically beside each other. They're about the same um, brightness, magnitude, I should say, and what a difference. Man, I'll never forget. I located it, and then I did a test exposure at 1 minute, and it just popped bright red on the back of my camera. And I could see that even the shape of it and everything. And that was just one 60-second exposure. I was just amazed. And I was sold at that point. In fact, here's the picture of it here. I mean, it's not the best. Again, keep in mind this was early on. But look at the color. Look at the detail I was able to get. This is only a couple hours worth of exposures, maybe 2.5. So the next week I went after the heart again, and this time using the L Extreme. And here it is here. Again, not an amazing image. This is only 2 hours, but what a difference from the first one. And the only thing that was different was the telescope itself. Sorry, the filter itself, not the telescope, not the camera. So that just goes to show what a difference a good light pollution filter makes. It really is a game changer, and that's why I really stress that if you're going to spend money on something, spend it on a good light pollution filter. Know your surroundings well, know where you're shooting, and then buy the right one accordingly, or if you can, even a couple, so you have those options, and making sure that it's the right type to fit into your camera, your telescope, whatever it is you're using. And you're going to see some pretty amazing improvements in your images as a result of it. As I mentioned, ideally at the beginning there, ideally we'd love to shoot just without any filters because you get those natural colors. And that's one thing you are going to see a drawback with, especially with these narrow band. It does mess with star colors. You lose a lot of that color. A lot of them just look sort of white or yellow. Unfortunately, that is a bit of a trade-off. So just something to keep in mind. But the ability to be able to go out and shoot on a full moon, that really is worth the money right there. Whereas normally you'd have to stay in. It's frustrating. You have a clear night finally, and of course it's a full moon. You can do it now. You can image, as I mentioned with Thor's helmet there, you can image on a bright street, a low faint target, and those light pollution filters work amazingly. It really is a game changer, and I think you're going to be pretty blown away by the results of that. So those are a few things to keep in mind, and a few examples of the ones that I use. There are, as I mentioned, there are many different types. So you can research it and talk to other guys and see what they use. But I've found really good results with these Optolones. The L Pro I'm still, as I mentioned, fooling around with, trying to get a little bit better. But I'm sure I'll figure it out. The other thing I just want to mention too. So we mentioned that like narrowband is good for emission. The more broadband suppression filters are good for reflection, but they're also good for galaxies. I should have mentioned that before. If you're shooting Andromeda, you're not going to use a narrowband filter because there's a lot of light coming from that filter is going to block out, and it's actually going to hinder your image. So for something like a galaxy like Andromeda or Triangulum, any of those galaxies, this is more what I would use, either this or if you can get it to work, the L Pro. Those are great filters. But what you can do is you can actually combine filters in your image. This is something that I want to do this fall when I'm going to be imaging Andromeda. I want to get a really nice image of it. Here's the first one I took. Again, this was early on. Not great, not horrible, but it's not an amazing image by any means. But what I want to do is I want to sink some time into it, maybe 6-8 hours with a filter like this or the L Pro. And then I want to add to that a couple hours using like something like this, the L Extreme. And what that's going to do is, yeah, it'll hinder a lot of that light that I want, but I already have 6 to 8 hours, so I don't care too much. I want to try and bring out that HA, which is the red emission nebulas inside that galaxy. You saw my image, now look at this one here. You see the difference? Obviously it's more clear and everything, but you see that the bits of red? That's actually emission nebula from the Andromeda galaxy. Even though it's, a couple million light years away, we're still able to see them. That's how bright they are. But you need to be able to use a filter like a narrowband to draw that out and be able to just add another element to your image and make it really stand out. So that's something I want to do. And something to keep in mind, you can actually combine these filters, and stack it all together, and you'll get an image like that, hopefully, that has even more detail and just amazing to look at. It's so beautiful. So there you go. There's my rundown on filters. I know I tried to keep it brief, but there's a lot to it. This was just super simple. Hopefully it helps you, and feel free to ask any question in the comments or mention a filter that you've had a success with, and that way we can help others as well with what is obviously a very challenging element of astrophotography, which is light pollution, something most of us have to deal with. So that's it, guys. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.